Real property versus personal property. So a couple of fundamentals that we need to know for testing purposes. Number one, real property is anything permanently attached or affixed to the land. And anything attached to the land in a permanent fashion also becomes part of the real property. So like you install a door onto the house and now that becomes part of the real property. We can refer to real property also as realty. So you might see that on exams. They use those words interchangeably. So real property equals realty. Personal property is anything not permanently attached to property or the land. And it's a pretty wide berth of stuff. So anything, you know, the microphone, the cameras, all of this stuff, nothing permanently attached to the land is all personal property. Now, on exams, they may call or refer to personal property as chattel or as personal T. And those are just a few fundamentals that you want to know. Now, I can convert a piece of real property and make it personal property through severing it from the land. So I take a tree and I cut it down. The wood is now separated from the ground. That's called severance. And then there's another phrase, which is the opposite, installing something permanently onto the house. That's annexation. So annexation is the process of converting personal property into real property, and severance is the process of converting real property into personal property. The bundle of rights, or the bundle of legal rights, sometimes I'll refer to them as that. Sometimes I'll even call them equitable title. Now, these are a cluster of intangible rights. Intangible means I cannot physically touch these things, but I get them with interests and estates in land. So, a good way to remember these, and these are classic for exams, like all of the following are bundle of rights except kind of questions. The right of possession, the right of control, the right of enjoyment, that's one of the biggest rights that you get when you own property, the right of disposition, the right to transfer, will, or sell the property how we see fit, and the right of exclusion, the right to keep parties off of our land if we so choose to do so in a legal fashion. And those make up the bundle of rights in real estate. And these are classic for real estate exams, so look out for them. This next section can be a little confusing to students sometimes, so it warrants a little bit of focus. In some parts of the country, you're going to see more questions on these, and in other parts of the country, you won't see as many questions. We call this the government survey system, or the rectangular survey system. And the logic here is you can identify specific parcels. It's a legal description, and it's one of the three legal descriptions that we have. There's government survey, there's meets and bounds, and there's lots and blocks, all three of which are on real estate examinations. More on the other two later. With government survey, there's a few fundamentals that we need to know. Number one, if you take a look at this diagram, the government survey system is built into this grid system, and there are 36 sections in this system. So we have 1 through 36, and that's how that works. This whole thing is called a township, and a township is massive. It's 23,040 acres in its entire landmass. So this rectangular thing that we're looking at here, 1 through 36, is now, if you fly high above it, is about 23,040 acres. So it's pretty massive. And then each of these townships are broken into 36 sections, not 37, but 36 sections. And each of these sections is 640 acres. And what we use this is if we kind of go lower onto this, we're sitting above the township. Now we kind of go into one section. If you're looking at this section here, there are 640 acres in a section. Therefore, 1/4 of a section has 160 acres, and half of that quarter has 80. And as you can see in this diagram here, this is 1/4. This lower quadrant here is the southwest 1/4 of this entire section. This here is the northwest 1/4 of this entire section. This is the northeast 1/4. So the entire piece here, this quarter, is 160 acres. So half of that would be 80 acres. And if you can look at this down here, this is the southeast 1/4. This whole thing is 160 acres. And then half of that is 80 acres. And then the other half is 40, and then 20 and 20. So what we can do is we can break down legal descriptions and land descriptions to these little blips all over the place. And that's the government survey system. And in our program, you'll also see some math programs or math questions that'll help you get through this section as well. On real estate examinations, you will need to know the definition of different types of liens. And by that, I'm talking about classifying things like what is voluntary versus an involuntary lien. A voluntary lien is a lien that was we placed on intentionally through our own action. So an example would be a mortgage. An involuntary lien was something I didn't want on there. So I don't pay my real estate taxes, and then they can place a tax lien on my property. So that would be an involuntary lien. All right. General liens apply to all property that I own, personal and real property. That's an attachment to everything. Losing in court a judgment, they can attach to anything. Specific liens attach to specific property, okay? Like a real estate tax lien or a mortgage lien, both attach to a specific property. Statutory liens are imposed by a court to enforce legal obligations and are written by law. Equitable liens are imposed by a court to achieve fairness. Superior liens take priority over everybody. So the government liens take priority, for example, over everybody. And then junior liens are always subordinate to superior liens. So any other lien holder that comes in line to collect on a property has to wait for the superior lien holder to get satisfied, and then they can go from there. So we just want to know a little bit about the classification of liens, and this is an important one for examinations. See you in the next one. What is an interest versus what is an estate? Definitely need to know the distinction between the two. So an estate is something that by nature, the extent of an individual's ownership interests in real property. So it's defined fairly specifically. An estate could include freehold estate, leasehold estate. So it not only describes sort of a right, but also the extent of the individual's actual right of possession and so on. And that's what an estate is. Now, an interest is simply the right that someone may have to a property. So a tenant at a leased property will also have an interest in that property. So interests can vary from strength, but an estate in land will also define the extent of that individual's ownership interest in that particular real property. So this is an important distinction to make. Read through this a few times just so you are clear on what is the difference between an interest and an estate.